Hey everybody, welcome back to lesson 3 of this completely free Vital tutorial. So in this lesson we are going to make a Supersaw sound with a little bit of a twist, nothing too crazy, and it's a fairly easy sound to make, but we're just going to use a few controls that we haven't really yet, so like some of the macro controls and the random controls, etc. So let's just have a quick sample of what we're actually making. So you get the idea, just a sort of traditional Supersaw kind of sound. Also, the patch for this is free to download, which will be either under the video if you're watching this on YouTube, or just a link in the description if you're watching it on borntoproduce.com. So you can download that. If you want to just load it up, you can just go into the little hamburger menu and go open external preset, navigate to where you downloaded it, and just select it and it will load. So obviously I'm going to make this from scratch. So let's just initialize the preset. And of course, as with everything, the first thing I want to do is sort of get the texture correct in the oscillator section. So I'm actually going to leave that as the standard waveform, but I'm just going to turn it down a bit, activate oscillator 2. This one we're going to have a few voices. Let's go up to 9 voices. Fraction more detune, 21%. And let's just turn it down a bit as well. So before we go any further, let's actually just shape this sound. We will be adding the other oscillator and the sample player as well, but let's just get the actual dynamics correct. So you're going to come over to envelope 1, which of course controls the dynamics. Let's just set this up. So I don't want full sustain with this. I want it to be slightly sort of plucky, like an arpeggiated sort of sound. Something like that's already absolutely perfect. We will of course be using other envelopes to modulate the filter and everything, but we'll get to that in a sec. Let's just carry on and get the other sounds in here. So this one, let's just have that up to 2 voices. It can stay on 20% detune. We might want to change that, but we can mess around with that later. So let's do something a little different with this oscillator, and we're going to change this to harmonic stretch. Now we're going to modulate this to sort of help create the sound of the Supersaw, and this is going to make it sound just a little bit different to what you're used to. But again, we're going to get to that in just a second. So let's activate the sampler. We will just keep it on white noise, but I want to have this on random. So it starts at a different position each time. I mean, it's not super noticeable, but it does help add a little bit of sort of movement to the sound, but we're going to want to turn this right down. Till the noise is just starting to be audible. It's supposed to almost sound like air added to the lead sound rather than actually like a full-on noise. So somewhere around there's pretty decent. Also just going to route all of these through filter 1. And let's activate filter 1. So first things first, let's just lower the resonance a little bit. It's just a bit extreme for a Supersaw, although of course you can change that as you wish. And the next thing that I want to do is actually modulate the filter cutoff using the envelope. So this will help sort of give it that slightly more plucky kind of sound. So let's just go to envelope 2. Just going to drag and drop that onto the cutoff. And for this, I want a very quick delay, less sustain. There you go. You can see it sort of going there with the attack. Well, sorry, not with the attack, but with the decay and sustain of the envelope. And it gives it that sort of more plucky kind of vibe. So just want to modify this very slightly. Have a nice quick decay. Sustains roughly there. And there we go, sounding pretty decent already. Now one thing I like to do with this sort of sound to keep it a bit more interesting and kind of changing over time is to add like a random oscillator, but we'll also tackle this when we go to the effects section as well. But in this case I'm going to add random 1 oscillator to the unison detune amount of oscillator 2. So you can hear it goes a bit weird there, but you can see it changing. So that's the voices all being basically detuned more or less, depending on the position of the random oscillator. Now, that's a little bit extreme, so we're just going to turn that down. I don't want like loads of variation. You can see there, it's just a little bit. So just bypass that. So when it's not on there, it's kind of like a more solidified sound. It's very consistently the same on each note, but with it, it just adds that bit of variation. Very subtle, but again, we're going to be adding a few sort of minor modulation effects like that again with the effects, which we'll get to in just a second. So a couple of things to do before we go any further, or before we get to the effects section, and that is I want to now link macro 1 control to a couple of these controls. So we're changing a number of controls over time with the same function. So when we want to automate this, we can just automate the one control and it will change a couple of different controls at the same time. Right, so first of all, I'm going to take macro 1, I'm going to dump it on our filter cutoff. Let's just change that so it's pretty effective, and I probably want to just get the balance of this right. So turn that right down. So basically what you want to do is, obviously if you've got like the cutoff here and you've got the macro control linked to it, when it's fully closed, if you like, or all the way down, you've still got the filter quite open, which obviously isn't what you want, so we want to turn that down as much as possible. Somewhere like that is absolutely fine, and then of course when it's actually all the way up, then it's basically fully open. And in fact the envelope 2 control is a little bit high, so we're just going to lessen that a bit. Now this will make the cutoff a little bit lower overall, so when I go all the way down, as you can hear, we're almost going to inaudible levels. Okay, so one last thing that I want to do, which just adds an extra bit to this sort of sound, is to use macro 1. I'm going to drag that over, and it's going to control the harmonic stretch amount. So as you can see, it kind of does that as we raise this up and down. But it's a bit extreme as it is at the moment, so I just need to turn that down. So let's go somewhere like a very sort of small cheese. And you can hear it just adds a bit of a different texture to this Supersaw sound, just making it a little bit different. And obviously the fact that it actually changes over time. Now you could choose a different starting amount for the spectral morph. But obviously you'll have sort of varying degrees of effectiveness. That doesn't really sound too Supersaw-y to me, so I think just having it back here is probably about right. Maybe a little less, so something like this. That's better. It just makes it sound a little bit different as opposed to your standard Supersaw. Okay, right, so we're pretty much set up. We've got all the controls linked that we want to macro 1. Of course, you can link more controls to macro 1. You might want to control the resonance or whatever, as well as the cutoff and the harmonic stretch. It's completely up to you, but I quite like where it is. So let's go to the effects page and get this sorted. So the first effect that I want to add is a compressor. Now you can hear just with it on, it has this nice kind of brightening and airy effects on the lead, which is quite nice as it is. So I'm literally just going to add that and leave it. Then we're going to add some EQ. So this is really just to take out the absolute low end. So I'm going to change that to a low cut. Nothing too crazy here. Just take out a bit. So you don't want to go too far. But just removing any sort of sub-bass frequencies. Don't really want them in our Supersaw lead. Let's add a reverb as well. Very important. Let's get that nice big epic sound. Let's just increase the time a bit. Really depends on the speed of your track, how long you want the time to be. If you've got a very slow track, you'll probably want the time to be longer. If you've got a very fast track, you might want the time to be less. It really depends. Sometimes that's not the case, but obviously choose wisely for your particular track. I'm just going to roll off. It's probably not super necessary, but we might just roll off some of the low end of this as well. and sounding pretty decent there. So the last two things that I want to add are going to be further sort of additions to the modulation, or the overall modulation of the sound. So let's add a flanger. So what I want to do is make this possibly a little bit slower. So let's just change this to seconds, and we'll have it about 6 seconds long roughly. So it's not far off what it was, but we need to turn down the mix, of course. So you've got this nice sort of fairly slow modulation in the background, just tweaking the sound. You'd have to sort of listen to it closely to realize it's being flanged, but that's kind of the point. We don't want it to be too obvious. But let's have a bit of a faster modulation. So I'm going to use the phaser for this, and clearly the mix is going to be way too much, although I'll just play it for you so you can hear what it's doing. So it's got that kind of odd phasey kind of sound to it, but let's just turn that right down. So we don't want much of this, and I want this to be quite quick. So I'm going to change this to seconds again, and let's just raise this up somewhere around the 0.9 seconds. So it's going quite quickly. Now if I turn the mix right up, you can sort of hear more what it's doing. Bypassed. So again, subtle effects, but it just adds a little bit of extra movement to it. And there we go, we're pretty much sorted. Just a couple of very minor tweaks. Just want to change the attack slightly and increase the release a little bit. Just think that balances it a little bit better. But there we go, pretty decent sound, but also pretty simple. So that's how we make it. I hope that video was helpful for you. Please do chuck us a like and subscribe for more content which is coming up. Thanks very much for watching, guys and girls. See you in the next one.